An old phone, a cruel laugh, and a hidden plan. She thought he was just another dreamer with nothing until the world found out what he really had. On a sunlit afternoon in the heart of downtown, the air hummed with the chatter of business deals and clinking coffee cups. The upscale cafe, Briel's, sat on a busy street corner, its large glass windows pulling in sunlight like a stage. Light on a polished set. Inside, the marble floors gleamed under polished shoes. Laughter bounced off exposed brick walls, and the scent of freshly ground espresso curled lazily through the air. Near the far corner of the cafe, almost hidden, behind a large potted plant, Malik sat hunched over a small wooden table. He wore a simple navy sweatshirt, the sleeves frayed at the cuffs, and jeans faded from countless washes. His sneakers were scuffed, the soles slightly separating at the edges. In this place of silver watches and luxury handbags, Malik's presence seemed like a quiet question mark at the end of a perfect sentence. Yet he barely noticed the glances that occasionally drifted his way. His world was narrowed to the rectangle of light in his hands, an old phone, with a spider web of cracks crawling across the screen. Every so often, his thumb hovered over the keypad, then darted down again with quick precision. The battered phone rested on a cheap plastic stand, plugged into a scratched portable charger that threatened to slip off the edge of the table. Beside the phone, a battered black notebook lay open, pages curled and creased. Lines of handwritten notes sprawled across them, some crossed out angrily, others ringed with tiny stars, arrows pointing here and there. Diagrams overlapped with lines of crude code, written in Malik's hurried scrawl. Each page seemed alive, with restless thought, ideas spilling onto paper faster than he could contain them. Malik's brow furrowed as he squinted at his screen, tapping, pausing, deleting, typing again. He barely felt the time slip by, or the sun shifting through the glass. To him, the cafe's gentle murmur was just white noise, a comforting hum that made the silence in his mind more focused. The world outside, shiny cars, important shoes, laughing couples, felt distant. Everything he needed was right here: the broken phone, the scribbled notebook, and the relentless pulse of an idea that refused to die. At the same time, the door swung open with a soft chime and a gust of warm air. Sienna stepped in like she owned the daylight. Her hair was perfectly styled in effortless waves, catching the sun in glimmers of gold. She wore an oversized designer blazer thrown carelessly over a crisp white crop top, high-waisted tailored pants, and sunglasses perched on her head, though she was already indoors. Her laughter, light and airy, floated ahead of her like perfume. Trailing behind her were her friends, equally polished, each with a designer bag slung over a manicured arm. They talked about last night's party, giggled about some scandalous rumor, snapped quick photos for social media, each moment curated to look casual, yet just perfect enough to spark envy. Sienna's eyes swept the cafe like she was scanning for a mirror to reflect her own image. Her friends drifted toward the marble counter, but she lingered, phone already out. Thumb scrolling mindlessly, she frowned when her screen flashed the dreaded red bar, 5% battery. She scanned the room, spotted the only open outlet near Malik's table, and rolled her eyes in mild annoyance. Without a word, she strode over. Malik felt a shift in the air before he looked up. Perfume, the click of expensive heels. He paused mid-sentence, eyes lifting from his cracked screen to Sienna's flawless one. "Hey," she said, voice sugar sweet but hollow. "Mind if I plug in? Don't want my phone to die on me." Malik nodded, shifting his back to make space. "Go ahead," he murmured, voice soft but polite. She crouched to plug her glossy phone into the socket, the cable brushing against Malik's ancient charger. For a moment, the two phones lay side by side, hers, spotless, sleek, a mirror of her world, his, cracked and taped at the corner, clinging stubbornly to life. The contrast was too obvious to ignore. Sienna stood up, glancing at Malik's device with a smirk tugging at her lips. Her friends noticed too, drifting over with curious eyes. "Is that seriously your phone?" she asked, loud enough for her friends to giggle on cue. "Wow, does it even work?" Malik's fingers tightened around the edges of his screen. He looked at her calmly, forcing a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It does what I need it to." Sienna's laugh rang like silver spoons clinking in a glass. She leaned closer, tapping her own phone mockingly. "Well, good luck with that. Hope it doesn't die on you. Looks like it's already halfway to the grave." The words slipped around the cafe like oil in water. Some people looked over, eyebrows raised. Malik felt a flush creep up his neck, but he turned his eyes back to the notebook, to the scribbled codes and messy arrows. He tapped the screen again, pushing the sting of laughter away. The words blurred for a second, then sharpened, as Sienna flipped her hair and turned back to her friends. Malik caught his reflection in the dark window beside him. For a moment, he let the hurt settle in his chest, then he swallowed it, pushing it down where it could burn clean. His thumb moved faster now, the faint clicking of the virtual keys like a quiet rebellion against the laughter that faded behind him. In the corner of the bustling cafe, surrounded by polished marble and carefully curated luxury, Malik hunched over his battered phone, eyes focused, mind unshaken. If anyone had looked close enough, they would have seen it, the quiet spark of a future being built, line by line, behind a cracked screen. Sienna's laughter still lingered like cheap perfume, sweet but sharp enough to sting. She settled herself at the edge of Malik's table without asking, her glossy phone plugged into the same outlet as his battered one. Her friends hovered behind her, their giggles muffled but unmistakable. To anyone watching, it looked like a harmless moment, a pretty girl recharging her phone beside a stranger. But for Malik, every chuckle echoed loudly in the small bubble of space he was trying to guard around him. He pretended not to hear. His eyes stayed locked on his cracked screen, the glow of a half-written line of code reflecting in his pupils. His thumb scrolled through lines of notes, fixing bugs, testing functions in his head faster than his phone could process them. The progress bar crawled at a stubborn pace. His cheap charger heated up under the table, pulsing warm through the cord like a weak heartbeat. Sienna leaned closer, pretending to peek at his screen, her perfume a sharp citrus blend mixed with the roasted coffee scent until Malik's nose burned. She tilted her head, feigning curiosity with an exaggerated pout. "What are you doing anyway?" she asked, voice dipped in syrup. She flicked a glance at his notebook pages curled like wilted petals, ink smudged at the edges. "Is that homework or something?" Malik didn't look up. He clicked the screen off to hide the error message that had just popped up for the third time. His voice was quiet, steady, just some work. Sienna's eyes sparkled with mock surprise. She turned to her friends as if he'd just told the punchline of a bad joke. "Work on that?" She tapped the cracked screen with a manicured nail, careful not to actually touch it too long. "Is that thing still alive?" "Didn't know people still used fossils." The word slipped out sharp, louder than necessary. A man to tables over glanced up from his laptop. A pair of teenagers in line for cold brew paused mid-conversation. Malik felt the faint prickle of eyes on him, pity, amusement, or worse, indifference. He swallowed the lump that rose in his throat. A tiny crack of embarrassment flickered in his chest, threatening to grow roots. But he pressed it down, like he always did, like he'd done 1,000 times in classrooms, job interviews, and too many city buses where people pretended not to stare. He met her eyes for the first time. They were bright, lined with expensive makeup, pupils sharp with the thrill of an easy target. Malik's lips twitched into something that might have been a smile if it weren't so tired. "It works well enough for what I need," he said. His tone was gentle, even like he was stating the weather. Sienna burst out laughing. It wasn't a mean laugh, not outright, but it was the kind that cuts deeper because it pretends to be harmless. Her friends echoed it, like well-trained parrots. One of them snapped a quick photo of Sienna posing with her pristine phone, angling it so the cracked one was visible too. Malik saw the flash, but didn't flinch. "Good luck with that, fossil man," Sienna teased, her smile wide and fake as glitter. She slipped back into her chair beside her friends, still plugged into his outlet, still draining the same current that barely kept his phone alive. Malik exhaled, long and slow, like he was letting the poison out through his lungs. He shifted, his notebook closer, shielding it with his elbow. He let his eyes drift back to the open page, scribbled words that only made sense to him. Tiny constellations of thoughts, arrows darting between boxes, half-formed ideas that had kept him awake for weeks. Outside the window, traffic crawled by in shimmering waves of heat. A man pushed a cart of knockoff sunglasses down the sidewalk. A kid clutched his mother's hand, pointing at a new toy store across the street. Life kept moving indifferent to cracked screens or expensive laughter. He flexed his fingers, letting them hover over the phone for a moment, like a pianist before a final note. His thumb tapped the screen, one line of code undone, rewritten, then another. He could still hear Sienna's laughter in his head, looping like a bad song. He let it settle in his gut like coal in a furnace, let it burn there, slow and steady. One of Sienna's friends leaned back, stage whispering loud enough for him to catch. Why even come here if you can't afford a real phone? Starbucks is down the block. They all giggled again. Sienna flipped her hair over her shoulder, her shiny phone gleaming with a new notification, a flood of hearts and laughing emojis under her fresh photo. Malik didn't look up. He refused to feed the fire she wanted. Instead, he flipped to a blank page in his notebook, ignoring the dull ache in his wrist. He wrote one word at the top in careful, blocky letters: launch. He underlined it twice. A new idea sparked behind his eyes. Maybe the bug wasn't in the code, it was in the interface. The bridge between his raw idea and the people who needed it. He started sketching, lines flowing like a quiet river, mind running faster than his cracked phone could keep up with. Dot in the corner of the cafe. Malik became a still point in a room buzzing with curated moments and hollow jokes. His fingers never stopped moving, each tap and scribble louder than any insult. If you look closely enough, if you ignore the cracks in the glass, the scuffs on his sleeves, the easy sneer on Sienna's face, you might have seen it. The first quiet heartbeat of something bigger, a blueprint for a door he would build, not to knock on, but to walk through whether anyone laughed or not. And Sienna, too busy basking in her own echo, would never see it coming. Malik's fingers moved in practice bursts, tapping lines of text onto the battered screen, erasing them, then rewriting them with tiny edits only he could see. Each word felt heavier than the last. Somewhere behind the cracks in the glass, he could almost see it, his idea taking shape like a sculpture emerging from stone. If he closed his eyes, he could hear its pulse beneath the chaos of the cafe. The air inside Reels had changed. It was busier now, louder, more people drifting in to escape the late afternoon heat. Baristas called out names, cups clinked against saucers. An espresso machine hissed steam into the air. But to Malik, all of it blurred into static. His thumb hovered over a notification that had just flashed on his old phone. Final pitch submission due by midnight tonight. The subject line sat there like a dare. He tapped it open, scanning the email for the 100th time. The contest was simple, but brutal. Anyone could submit, but only 10 would make the short list for the live pitch round next month. And to even stand a chance, your prototype had to work flawlessly. Malik's prototype did not work flawlessly. Not yet. A single bug, small, stupid, stubborn, kept crashing the user login. It was like a tiny thorn buried under skin. No one else could see it, but Malik could feel it every time he breathed. He pulled his charger closer, fingers fumbling at the frayed cord. The phone's battery icon flashed an accusing red, 9%. He jiggled the plug until the light turned green. Again, praying the connection would hold. His heart thumped in his throat, loud enough to drown out Sienna's laughter for half a second. He could feel her eyes on him before he heard her voice. She leaned back in her chair, her own phone lying on the table like a sleek pet, purring at her every swipe and scroll. Her friends flanked her like satellites, orbiting her glow, still typing away on that museum piece. She asked, drawing out each word like it tasted sweet on her tongue. One of her friends stifled a laugh, peeking at Malik from behind oversized sunglasses she still wore indoors. Malik didn't look up this time. He couldn't afford the luxury of her voice in his head right now. He forced his eyes to the screen. Line of code, debug, error, rewrite. A bead of sweat slid from his hairline, tickling his temple before dropping onto the notebook below. He flipped a page. Scribbled in the margins were 3 words, underlined so hard they dented the necks. Sheet, pitch or bust. He'd written them last night, when he poured the last of his instant coffee into a chipped mug and promised himself this time he wouldn't choke on his own hope. Outside the window, dusk began to tint the city in soft amber. Office workers drifted by, tapping at their watches, hurrying to dinner reservations and soft beds. Malik's bed was a couch in a studio apartment 3 blocks away, where he'd left the one good pillow prop under the window to catch the only sunbeam the place ever saw. He hadn't seen that pillow in daylight for days. He forced himself to refocus. The login bug. It was in the code. He realized it was the permissions. He rewrote the line, carefully, thumb brushing the glass so lightly it almost didn't register. He hit run. The screen stuttered, flickered down for half a second. The app's splash screen held steady before crashing again. Malik pressed his eyes shut, jaw tightening. The corner of his phone was warm now to warm. The charger cord glowed faintly under the table light, bent at an unnatural angle where the rubber casing had split open months ago. He checked the battery, 6%. Beside his phone, Sienna's device chimed with a new notification. She tapped it with a bored finger, screen waking to a flood of likes and laughing emojis. She spun her phone so her friends could see the post her pose next to Malik's cracked screen, captioned with a single word, #relic. They all broke. In a hushed snickers. Some people really think they're gonna change the world with 50 cents and a broken toy, she said, loud enough for the couple at the next table to pause mid-conversation. She didn't look at Malik, didn't need to. His silence fed her more than any reaction could have. Inside Malik's chest, something small and brittle shifted. Anger flared for a heartbeat hot and blinding, but he refused to feed it the wrong fuel. He let it settle lower, deep in the same place he kept every dismissive look, every closed door, every time he'd shown up to a pitch meeting and watched the smiles fade when they saw him instead of a polished kid with venture capital. Parents. He opened a new note in his phone, typed to words, test again. Then he drew a shaky breath and forced himself to smile at the notebook's messy sprawl. Every scribble here was a door he'd built with scraps, old tutorials, borrowed library hours, stolen minutes on Cafe WI-V. Outside, the sun dipped behind an office tower, the glass catching fire for a moment before melting into dusk. Malik checked the time. 4:37 p.m. He had 7.5 hours left to submit something that worked. His charger hiccuped. The battery blinked up to 7%, then back to 6%. He nudged the plug deeper into the outlet. Sienna's pristine cable gleamed. Beside his frayed one, a perfect mirror of everything between them. 2 phones. 2 worlds. 1 heartbeat. Sienna watched him with that lazy smile, all but daring him to look up, to acknowledge her again. He didn't. He couldn't. Instead, he focused on the only thing that mattered. Each line of code, another brick in a bridge only he could see, stretched across the void between this cracked screen and a place where no one like Sienna could ever laugh him small again. He didn't have time to explain. He didn't have time to fight her words. He only had time to finish. By the time the sun finally sank behind the city's jagged skyline, the cafe's warm light took on a softer glow. The once busy counter had thinned out, the noise of clinking cups fading into the low hum of quiet conversations and the hiss of milk steaming behind the bar. Sienna's laughter had grown stale. She'd grown bored, as people like her always did when their audience moved on. Her friends had drifted to the pastry case to snap photos of croissants they wouldn't eat. She scrolled through her phone, half listening to her friends chat about new dinner spots. Malik barely noticed her anymore. The edges of his focus blurred everything but the lines of code stacked like fragile dominoes. On his battered screen, his battery crept up to a stubborn 9%, just enough hope to keep going. Every so often, his thumb paused above the screen as if the words might write themselves if he just believed hard enough. At Sienna's table, the giggles dulled. She glanced back at Malik one more time, maybe hoping for a flinch, an embarrassed glance. When she got none, she rolled her eyes in a final, dismissive sweep, gathering her pristine charger and untangling her designer bag from the back of her chair. "Come on, girls. This place is dead," she sighed, loud enough for the barista to catch the insult. She didn't say goodbye to Malik. She didn't even look at him again as she drifted out the door, friends in tow, their laughter a hollow echo swallowed by the cafe's glass walls. Malik watched their reflection vanish into the neon outside. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The space around him felt lighter now, as if someone had opened a window in his mind. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of his phone, feeling the tiny crack that split across the corner like a scar. His eyelids drooped for a moment, just a blink, but the weight of the bug, the code, the deadline still pulsed behind his eyes. Then, from somewhere to his right, a voice drifted into his tired bubble. "Mind if I ask what you're building, young man?" Malik blinked and turned. He hadn't even noticed the old man before. He'd been there the whole time, tucked into the shadows of a corner table, half hidden behind a folded newspaper and a single mug of black coffee that had gone cold long ago. He looked like someone's favorite grandfather, gray hair neatly combed back, wire-rimmed glasses perched low on his nose, wearing a well-worn brown cardigan over a crisp collared shirt. His eyes, though, were clear and alert, the kind that seemed to see further than the room they were in. Malik sat up straighter, surprised. He closed the notebook just slightly, reflexively guarding it like a child might protect a secret drawing. "Sorry, didn't mean to bother anyone," Malik said quickly, voice low and a touch embarrassed. The old man gave a gentle chuckle, shaking his head. "Not a bother at all. I've been watching you tap away on that old phone for over an hour. You looked like you were wrestling a bear in there." He tapped the side of his own head with a knuckle, grinning. "I'm curious. What's so important you can't let that poor phone rest?" Malik hesitated. He learned the hard way that people didn't always want the real answer when they asked questions like that. Some people just wanted to confirm their assumptions. Some just wanted to hear themselves give advice. But the old man's eyes were patient, warm like a door left, slightly ajar on a cold night. Malik felt his fingers relax. He turned the notebook around, sliding it just far enough so the old man could see the mess of arrows, boxes, and scribbles. "It's dumb. It's an app," Malik began, voice rough from hours of silence. "I'm building a platform for local businesses, especially small ones, minority-owned, immigrant-owned, family places that can't afford big marketing. It connects them with customers, helps them find investors too, if they want to grow." He flipped a page, pointing at a crude diagram. "Most people I grew up with didn't know how to pitch their ideas, or they didn't have the network. I want to make something that makes it easier for them to get seen, get funded, stay open." He paused, realizing how raw he sounded. He looked up, half expecting the old man to give him that polite, dismissive smile people offered when they thought you were dreaming a big dot. Instead, the man just nodded slowly. His fingers drummed the edge of his cold coffee mug, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "That's a good thing to build," he said simply. His eyes flicked to Malik's phone, then back to the notebook. "How much longer till you finish it?" Malik let out a half laugh, running a hand over his hair. "Depends if my phone makes it through tonight. There's a pitch deadline at midnight. If I can't fix this bug before then, well, maybe next time." The old man studied him for a moment, then reached into the inner pocket of his cardigan. He pulled out a thin leather wallet, slipped free a simple white card, and slid it across the table to Malik. On the card, in neat black print, George Keaton, Angel Investments and Strategy. Below that, just a number and an email. No fancy logo, no slogan. "I like what you're doing," George said, leaning back with a faint creak of his chair. "Call me if you need a real charger, or anything." Bigger than that, Malik stared at the card, his thumb tracing the raised letters like Braille. His mouth opened, but the words tangled on his tongue. "I thank you," he managed at last. His voice cracked around the edges of the word. He slipped the card into his back pocket like a fragile note. He didn't want to fold it harshly. George just nodded, as if they'd agreed on something without speaking it out loud. He checked his watch, an old analog face with a cracked leather band not unlike Malik's phone. "Don't let that deadline slip away," George said, standing slowly. He gave Malik's shoulder a light, reassuring tap as he passed. Sometimes the hardest thing is the last push. And just like that, George Keaton walked out into the soft dusk, leaving Malik at his table tired, anxious, but now holding something more than a dying phone and an unfinished idea. He sat for a long moment, staring through the window where Sienna's laughter had vanished hours ago. Then he turned back to his cracked screen. The bug was still there, so was the code, but now, so was the door Malik hadn't known he was allowed to open. A warm Sunday afternoon drifted through the windows of Sienna's chic bedroom. Sunlight spilled across white sheets rumpled from a late morning spent scrolling, tapping, scrolling again, endless loops of curated perfection that somehow left her emptier each time her thumb reached the screen's edge. She lay sprawled on her plush duvet, a satin robe slipping from one shoulder. A bowl of half-eaten fruit perched dangerously close to the edge of her nightstand. Her phone gleamed in her palm, latest model, flawless glass, framed by a glittering case that cost more than some people's rent. She flicked through her feeds like a bored queen, thumbing through a deck of dull playing cards, photos of the same faces in the same restaurants with the same angles, sponsored posts, brand collabs, a petty argument in her group chat about who owed what from the last rooftop dinner. She sighed, letting the boredom settle into her ribs like stale air. Then, mid-scroll, something new broke through the static. A headline, bright and bold, "Local man's app goes viral. Connecting small businesses to big investors, changing the game for communities." Sienna paused. Her thumb hovered. She read it again, a mild frown tugging at the smooth line between her brows. She tapped a link out, curiosity, nothing more. A short video played. Shaky footage of neighborhood storefronts, barbershops, corner cafes, people standing in doorways, smiling wide for local news cameras. The anchor's voice was all excitement. The app, Connect Bridge, has gone from late-night pitch to national spotlight in just a few weeks, helping hundreds of minority-owned businesses find funding and customers in record time there. In the middle of the clip caught in a brief cutaway was Malik, the same worn sweatshirt, the same quiet eyes, but now he sat in a bright co-working space, a clean, new laptop open beside him. A small team bustled around him, 3 people, maybe 4, talking in urgent, hopeful voices. At the edge of the frame, half out of focus but unmistakable, was the old man George Keaton. He stood behind Malik's chair, one hand resting lightly on the backrest, leaning in to read something on the screen. His lips moved, coaching, explaining. Malik listened, nodded, fingers tapping at keys that no longer stuttered under cracked glass. Sienna's stomach twisted, though she couldn't have said why. She tapped over to the App Store without thinking. ConnectBridge, there it was. Front page, editor's pick, 5 stars glowing like tiny taunts. She hesitated, then hit download. When it opened, the app's welcome screen bloomed onto her phone. Sleek, modern, bright colors. A tagline at the top: your neighborhood, your investment, your future. She scrolled through the featured businesses, some tiny food trucks she'd never noticed before. A small second-hand bookshop near the block she'd once mocked for being run down. Each listing showed photos, stories, links to donate or invest directly. At the very bottom of the homepage, a line of tiny gray text: built by ConnectBridge Labs, founder Malik D. Harris. Her breath caught for half a second. Her mind reeled back to the cafe, the cracked phone, the ancient charger, her laughter spilling into marble and glass while he'd quietly typed a revolution into existence. Sienna locked her phone, tossing it aside onto the duvet as if it might sting her fingers. She stared up at the ceiling. A tiny, unpleasant thought nudged at the back of her mind. She'd been so certain he was just another nobody with a broken toy. Now here he was, a name in the headlines, a link in everyone's pocket. Meanwhile, halfway across town, in a sunlit, co-working space tucked above a modest row of street shops, Malik sat hunched over his new laptop. Back curved in the same familiar way, but the lines of exhaustion in his face had shifted. Now they were mixed with something sharper: purpose, relief, the fragile shape of pride. George Keaton sat beside him, peering at a second monitor through his glasses, offering notes in a low, calm voice. The old man had barely left Malik's side since that night at the cafe, turning up with a spare charger first, then a proper laptop, then introductions to 3 other people who knew how to stretch a scrappy idea into a viable launch. In front of Malik, a video call glowed for neat squares filled with sharp suits, eager eyes, big city backgrounds. Investors, partners, mentors, people who a month ago wouldn't have given him more than a polite nod if they passed him in a lobby. Now they leaned forward, scribbling notes, asking questions that made Malik's heart jump into his throat. How soon could we scale? What do you need next? Who else should we talk to? He answered carefully, voice steady. His old phone sat on the corner of the table like a relic of another life. Screen black now, charger unplugged forever. It reminded him, every time he glanced at it, what it felt like to be invisible, what it felt like to be laughed at for daring to dream out loud. He glanced sideways at George, who just gave him a small nod, that same calm, fatherly approval that said, keep going. They're listening now. Outside the big window, the city buzzed under the soft afternoon sun. Somewhere in that maze of glass and concrete, corner stores and pop-ups were signing up to the app one by one. Each profiler promised that this wasn't just his win, but theirs too. A notification pinged at the corner of his screen. ConnectBridge, 5,000 new downloads in the last hour. Malik's chest tightened, then loosened all at once. His fingers found the edge of the old notebook at his side, its pages still messy with scribbles and half-erased dreams. He tapped it twice, like knocking on wood. Outside, people like Sienna would scroll, curious and maybe a little uneasy, realizing delayed that what they'd once mocked was now the ground shifting under their feet. Malik smiled quietly, almost to himself, then leaned back into the call, voice strong and sure as he laid out his next steps. His revolution didn't need to be loud. It just needed to keep building, one cracked screen at a time, until the whole city could feel it humming beneath their fingertips. Weeks blurred into weeks, and ConnectBridge grew roots in places Malik hadn't even mapped yet. Each morning he woke to new messages: restaurant owners, young kids with side hustles, tired fathers with decades-old repair shops, each one pouring life into the platform he'd once coded on a dying phone beside a mocking laugh. Now, the cracked phone sat in a small box on the shelf above his desk in his new, sunlit workspace. He kept it like a relic, proof that something broken could still build something whole. One Friday afternoon, the air in the co-working space hummed with quiet triumph. Malik sat at the long communal table surrounded by sticky notes, coffee cups, and a whiteboard crowded with arrows and markets and plans. He wore the same old sweatshirt. He still liked its softness, the way it reminded him he hadn't crossed some invisible line into becoming one of those suits. Who forgot where they came from? George Keaton leaned over his shoulder, reading an email that had just arrived in Malik's inbox. The old man's eyebrows rose above his thin glasses, then sank again as he clicked his tongue. Well, now, that's interesting, George murmured. Malik glanced at the email's header, advertising, Proposal Prime Realty Group. Below it, a logo he recognized from signs plastered all over half-renovated buildings in the neighborhood. He'd grown up in Prime Realty Group, and the man behind it, Leonard Ashcroft. Malik knew the name. Everyone did. Old money with a new PR problem. A reputation for revitalizing blocks that didn't need him pushing out families, hiking up rents, leaving empty glass shells in their place. Read it, George said. Settling back with his paper coffee cup, Malik skimmed the email. The offer was glossy corporate fluff dressed up as community care. Prime really wanted to buy ad space across ConnectBridge's homepage and newsletter. Their pitch dripped with the right buzzwords: empowerment, revitalization, giving back. They offered a figure that would have made Malik's hand shake a month ago. Your platform aligns with our vision for inclusive growth. Malik read aloud, the taste of the words like dust in his mouth. George's smile was dry. They want your good name to scrub their dirty one. So, what do you want to tell them? Malik stared at the screen for a long moment. He pictured the blocks where he'd watched corner stores vanish behind plywood. He remembered his mother's best friend packing up her nail salon overnight. When rent tripled in 2 months, he pictured the families who'd signed up on ConnectBridge this week, each one banking on his promise that this app would never sell them out for an easy buck. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then he typed a reply, short, clean, and polite. Thank you for your interest. Unfortunately, ConnectBridge does not partner with businesses whose practices conflict with our mission to support ethical, community-rooted growth. We wish you the best with your future campaigns. He read it twice, then he hit send. George gave a quiet, approving laugh. Good lad. They'll call back, maybe double the offer. Malik shrugged. Then I'll say it twice. He leaned back in his chair, letting the hum of the workspace fill him up. A wind built on his terms still tasted sweeter than any paycheck padded with empty promises. 2 weeks later, Malik found himself at a small community gala, one of those young innovators events someone else had signed him up for. He'd never liked these room-slick suits with too firm handshakes, clinking glasses, polite applause for buzzwords thrown at PowerPoint slides. But this one felt different. Local chefs, startup kids, neighborhood organizers all mingling under string lights in a renovated warehouse that still smelled faintly of paint. He just finished giving a short thank you speech, stumbling through words he was still learning to wear comfortably. George had clapped loudest from the back, a proud grin creasing the old man's face. Malik stepped off the low stage, looking for a moment of quiet near the back doors where the summer air cut through the warm buzz inside. He didn't see her. At first, she found him. Sienna's voice pulled him back before he could slip away. Malik, hey, hi. Her tone tried for bright, but cracked at the edges, like porcelain rattling in the sink. He turned. She stood there in a shimmering dress that cost more than his laptop, hair pinned up, makeup flawless. She held a champagne flute she hadn't sipped. For a moment, she looked just like the girl who laughed at his cracked screen, except now her smile wavered when it met his eyes. Hey, Malik said softly. He meant it. No edge, no sharpness. She tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, searching for words. I saw you on the news and the app. It's amazing what you've done. Seriously, she laughed, awkward. I just wanted to say congrats. Really, you did it. Malik studied her face. He wondered if she remembered the cafe as clearly as he did. He could still see her phone plugged into his outlet, the giggles floating through the marble and glass. He gave her a gentle smile, not mocking, not smug, just honest. Thank you, Sienna, he said. He said her name on purpose, to make it real. He saw relief flicker in her eyes, like she braced for a slap that never came. He held her gaze a moment longer. Then, because he wanted her to know and because it was true, he added, "I should thank you too. You know." She blinked. "Me?" He nodded. "You made me finish. You didn't mean to. But that laugh, that was the last push I needed." He let the words settle between them, light but unshakable. "So, thanks for the motivation." Sienna's mouth opened, but no words came. She looked down at her flute, then back up. He gave her another small nod. No hard feelings. No open doors either. Malik stepped past her, back toward the circle of neighbors and new friends who were waiting to show him their shop ideas, their recipes, their business cards smudged with hope, people who weren't laughing anymore. Behind him, Sienna stood frozen in the string lights, watching him vanish into a room she couldn't decorate with her father's money. When Malik stepped out of the warehouse that night, the hum of voices, laughter, and clinking glasses drifted after him, fading into the warm hush of the street overhead. City lights blinked awake, neon signs humming over old brick storefronts. In the distance, the skyline rose like glass mountains, cold towers, and warm windows, a patchwork of what the city had been and what it was becoming. He stood there a moment, the door closing behind him with a soft thud, muffling the music and the polite chatter inside. The street was nearly empty at this hour, just the shuffle of someone locking up a nearby shop, the dull rattle of a bus rolling past on its last route home. Malik dug his hands into his pockets, feeling the worn edges of George's old business cards still tucked in their crease now, but still a reminder that sometimes the smallest doors lead you through the thickest walls. His mind flickered back to the cafe, the smell of burnt coffee, the sting of laughter in marble echo. He pictured Sienna's face, her awkward smile, her eyes searching for a version of him that might forgive her enough to erase the part she played. He didn't hate her for it. He didn't need to. Some lessons you don't repay in cruelty, you repay by outgrowing them. He crossed the street, his sneakers scuffing the faded lines of a crosswalk he jogged across 1,000 times on his way to part-time jobs, classes he couldn't afford, interviews where his name alone seemed to shrink the room. Now those same sidewalks felt different under his feet, like they belonged to him too, stitched into the story he'd chosen to write. Instead of waiting for permission to tell, he stopped at the edge of a shuttered bakery. The windows were dark, but a small handwritten sign inside read, "Reopening soon thanks to Connect Bridge." He smiled when he saw it, a quiet, private smile meant only for him and the dark glass. He could almost taste the warm bread they'd sell again, smell the sugar dusting the air come sunrise. Someone's grandmother would keep her promise to pass down her recipes. Someone's child would see the lights flick on again and know they still had a place in this neighborhood. Malik slipped into the small park across the street, just a patch of grass, cracked benches, a rusted swing squeaking in the breeze. He sat down under a street lamp, its yellow halo catching the soft lines of his notebook as he flipped it open on his knee. The pages were still smudged and ragged, corners bent like tired wings. Between messy lines of code and diagrams that only he could read, he found an old scribble he'd written months ago. "One day this won't be just mine. It'll be theirs too." And it really was. Not perfect, not finished, but alive, growing, spreading from corner shops to food trucks to tiny side hustles. That might one day be tomorrow's Main Street, a bridge from one cracked dreamer to the next. His phone buzzed in his pocket, the new one, slick, fast, all the things his old fossil had never been. But it wasn't the glass or the speed that made him reach for it. It was the string of new notifications, another shop signing up, another local investor matching a loan, another stranger dropping a message that simply read, "Thank you." Malik set the phone on the bench beside him. He ran his thumb over the smooth, unbroken screen, remembering how easily Sienna's laughter had bounced off the cracks of the old one, how that same laughter had sounded like a dare he'd decided to answer instead of swallow. Above him, a plane droned across the night sky, blinking red and white against the velvet dark. Somewhere inside that tin can, someone was dozing off, dreaming of something impossible, something small, but loud in their chest. He hoped they'd build it to. He hoped nobody would crush it before it took its first breath. He thought of George's hand on his shoulder in that cafe, the quiet question that cracked open a new door. He thought of Sienna's forced smile, her glittering world built on spotless screens and shallow posts so easy to topple. When you realized it was hollow underneath, Malik leaned back, eyes drifting to the stars, mostly drowned by city glow. He didn't need a skyline to remind him he'd already built something taller than any tower. And the best part, he hadn't built it just for himself. Sometimes he wondered what it looked like from the outside, his quiet tapping on a cracked screen while the world snickered over latte foam. To them, it probably looked sad, foolish, small, but to him, it had always been alive, breathing, building, waiting for someone to stop laughing long enough to listen. Somewhere nearby, a delivery bike zipped past, the rider wearing a neon sticker on his helmet, "Support Local." Probably hadn't even realized yet he was riding for half the shops Malik had just helped keep open. He closed the notebook, slid it back into his bag, and stood up, letting the late breeze tangle his hair. Tomorrow, he'd meet 3 more owners who needed help setting up. Next week, maybe 10 more. Next year, who knew? He picked up the new phone, held it in his palm. But for a heartbeat, he saw the old one in its place. Cracked glass, chipped case, battery clinging to life by sheer stubborn will. He almost missed. It almost. Malik let out a soft laugh, so quiet it got lost in the rustle of leaves overhead. He could hear his mother's voice then, clear as day. Take care of what you've got until you have what you need, and never let them shame you for dreaming with less. He slipped the phone into his pocket and turned for home, wherever home was now. Maybe it was this city. Maybe it was this bridge he built for strangers who felt like family the moment they signed up. Above the hush of traffic, the narrator's final words carried on the breeze. Sometimes the world laughs at your old phone until they realize you were building the future in its cracked screen all along. And the lesson that echoed after, as softly and powerfully as the night itself: never underestimate quiet ambition. True value is not in what you own, but in what you create for others. And Malik walked on one quiet heartbeat at a time into a future that no laughter could shrink.